So Stario released their developer notes for the future of the game, and it included a piece of information that has had the entire community talking: the buffing and strengthening of older units, or older units themselves, as translated by Mr. 1%. And as you'd expect, this news has gotten practically everyone who plays the game excited for the possible buffs that they may bring to our older beloved units. So I decided to start a series where I take a look at a character's kit and suggest my own ways in which I would buff said character. And then you guys could probably tell me if I'm cooking or not. These ideas and speculations are based on the assumptions that these buffs will be directed towards a character themselves and not towards a Lycoon or some other roundabout system like people suggest. Except for an awakening system, which is kind of like similar to buffing the character's kit itself, so yeah. But that being said, I do want to say that you should probably keep your expectations low, as this is a gacha game after all, so you avoid being completely crushed depending on how they go about the changes. With that said, let's get into how to buff a Seele. So I'm pretty sure we all know why Seele's bad right now. She's a quantum DPS that revolves around being fast and taking extra turns through her resurgent state. But being the first limited character to be released, she has very poor multipliers, a kit that cannot be compared to the likes of newer ones, pretty bad eidolons, and an inherent issue with her not being able to proc the resurgent state if she can't kill an enemy, which isn't all that uncommon. And although that does have to do with the amount of damage that she outputs, it could also be deemed as a skill issue, partially, but yeah, it's still a problem nonetheless. Let's get started on how to actually buff her. If this system will involve changing a character's kit, then it's no doubt that that will also be followed by multiplier increases. Seele's basic attack and skill have decent multipliers that don't need to be changed right now, but her ultimate and resurgent states could be reworked. So let's start with her ultimate. Right now, the best hunt unit in the game, phainon, has an ultimate scaling of 860%, which is more than double of Seele's ultimate scaling. To improve this, they could either go about increasing her multipliers by 1.5%, which would put her at around 650, or they could add a split scaling to her ultimate where she scales off both her attack and her speed. And this actually makes sense lore-wise even more compared to someone like Aglaia, cause Seele is the literal definition of speed. She's probably the only character we've met that can bypass Acheron's time dilation. I might as well be the fastest character in the entire verse. Taking a look at her resurgence, this multiplier could be increased by 20%, putting it at a 100% damage bonus. But then the major change would be increasing the amount of turns that it's active for to 2, which makes it easier to kill enemies and enter the resurgent state again. Now let's take a look at her major traces. First of all, her A2, which can be changed to whenever this unit attacks an enemy, if their HP falls below 50%, advances this unit's action by X%, which helps her get her extra turn again in the situation that she doesn't kill an enemy, and then if the enemies are killed, increases this unit's crit damage by X%. This buff makes it easier for her to get her next turn in the situation where she doesn't kill an enemy, but then gives her a useful crit damage buff in the situation that she does. Her A4 increases her quantum resistance span by 20% while she's in the buff state, and this could also follow the longer duration that we discussed earlier for her resurgent state. So I believe that it is fine as it is. Now, since we've already put the action advancement into her A2, her A6 can be changed to each time the resurgent state is triggered, increase this unit's speed by X%. This can stack up to Y times and lasts for the rest of the battle. Once the maximum stack is reached, greatly reduce this unit's chance of being attacked. This brings back the major A2 trace, and the reasoning that goes into this is that the Ascension 6 increases her speed a lot, and the character that's moving very fast should be hard to hit by enemies, right? So it makes sense that she would be harder to hit after her speed buff from the A6 has maxed out. Or if I wanted to make this broken, I could just make it so that there's a chance that the enemy attacks miss her when her speed buff is maxed out. Yeah. When I think about it, that sounds way too broken and crazy. And considering we don't have a missing mechanic in Star Rail yet, it definitely won't be implemented. Although it does make sense lore-wise. Now, going over to her Eidolons. Because we are already getting a speed buff from the E6, this can be completely changed and the E1 can be left as is, or swap it out for a defense ignore. Now, for her E2 change. After every 2 uses of a basic attack, skill, or ultimate, this unit immediately gains the resurgent state, and this does not affect the resurgence triggered by the skill. Also, to kind of not make it too broken, attacks done in the resurgent state do not count towards the effect. With this buff and the increase in uptime from her resurgence talent, you would have some pretty good uptime on the damage percent her resurgent state gives, and possibly even have it permanently for all your attacks. This would make it possible to have a resurgence turn come up twice in the turn order, which really brings to light the lore-wise potential of Seele. Of course, without the last restriction though, attacks done during the resurgent state would count towards this, and then it would just be straight up broken. I got this idea from Sunday's light cone, which gives him an extra skill point with every 2 uses of either his skill or his ultimate. When you also tie that to the action advance for when enemies fall below 50% HP on the A2 trace, you would be proccing your resurgences pretty fast, making Seele really good for all sorts of content, but improving her performance even further in pure fiction, which was not really my goal cause she's already good in pure fiction, but well, whatever I guess. And now finally her E6, the one that's meant to make her broken. So for this, I kept the first part of the E6 that increases her damage by 15% after she uses her ultimate and inflicts the butterfly flurry state on the target. But because it is tied to the enemy's turn, and our Seele is now taking a lot of more actions and getting a lot more action advances, this can stay as it is, although correct me if I'm wrong and it isn't tied to the enemy's turn. Okay, now for the second part of the E6. Enemies defeated within the resurgence state will trigger another resurgence effect. But if I wanted to make it even more broken, I could also make it such that the hits required for the E2 to proc can also be done with the resurgence attacks, which would just be really stupid. Oh yeah, and I just realized, but if you're having a question about the E2 not being effective due to the fact that we did increase the uptime for the resurgent state, I more or less made that change keeping in mind that the resurgent state is the extra turn, and then the damage buff it provides can be extended outside of the state. And so that avoids any conflict with the E2 not being effectively procced. Okay, now I would take a look at her light cone, but I am not getting paid enough for this shit. Now with that said, if you're enjoying this video so far, do make sure to drop a like and a sub, and also comment down below if I am cooking with this buff or not, as well as whether or not you guys would like me to do this for other characters. All jokes aside, I do feel like the light cone is pretty fine as it is, and it also does implement the speed scaling that I did want to put into her base kit, with her Ascension 6 increasing her speed and then increasing her damage when it's maxed out. But then I decided to change that into reducing the chances of her being attacked due to the light cone already having some speed scaling in it. And so yeah, with that said, that was my take on how to buff a Seele, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.